The screams from the Wyoming Territorial Asylum echoed across the dusty plains of Laramie County, even on windless days, though most folks claimed they only heard them in their nightmares. Augustus Xavier had never been one to believe in ghosts or superstition, but standing outside the iron gates on that blistering July afternoon in 1882, he understood why people crossed the street to avoid walking past the place. The three-story brick building rose from the prairie like a monument to human suffering, its narrow windows barred and dark, its walls stained with decades of rain and neglect. He had come here with a purpose that had little to do with charity and everything to do with a debt he owed to a dying man. But now that he stood here, the leather reins of his pack mule loose in his calloused hands, he wondered if some debts were better left unpaid. The superintendent, a thin man with wire spectacles and hands that trembled like autumn leaves, met Augustus in the entrance hall. The smell hit first, a combination of lye soap, human waste, and something else Augustus could not quite name but made his stomach turn. He was a mountain man, had spent the last 15 years trapping beaver in the Rockies, surviving winters that killed weaker men, fighting off grizzlies and hostile encounters with equal measure. But this place unnerved him in ways that wilderness dangers never had. "Mr. Xavier, I must say your letter was quite unusual," the superintendent said, adjusting his spectacles nervously. "We do not often have people requesting to take responsibility for our patients. Are you certain you understand what you are asking?" Augustus nodded, his long dark hair tied back with a strip of leather, his broad shoulders filling the narrow hallway. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his frame thick with muscle earned from years of hard living. His hands, scarred and strong, held his wide-brimmed hat. "I made a promise to Thomas Lincoln before he died. He said his daughter was here, locked up for no good reason except that his second wife wanted her gone. Said she was sane as anyone, just inconvenient to a woman who wanted her inheritance." The superintendent's expression flickered with something that might have been sympathy or might have been indigestion. "Mr. Lincoln died 6 months ago, I understand. His daughter Delilah has been with us for 3 years. I will be frank with you, sir. She barely speaks. She does not engage in the therapeutic activities we provide. She simply sits and stares out the window of her cell. If she is sane, she has done an excellent job of hiding it." "I would like to see her," Augustus said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from years of self-reliance. The superintendent led him through a maze of corridors. Other patients pressed their faces against the small windows in their doors, some calling out, others simply watching with empty eyes. Augustus felt each gaze like a physical weight. He had seen men go mad in the mountains, isolated too long or struck with cabin fever, but this was different. This was organized madness, institutionalized and ignored. They stopped before a door no different from the others. The superintendent fumbled with his keys, then pushed it open. The room was small, perhaps 8 feet by 10, with a narrow bed, a chamber pot, and a single barred window that looked out over the brown prairie grass. Sitting on the bed, her back straight despite 3 years of this hell, was Delilah Lincoln. She looked up when they entered, and Augustus felt something shift in his chest. Her father had said she was 24, which would make her younger than Augustus by 8 years, but her eyes held an agelessness that spoke of suffering. Her dark blonde hair hung limp and unwashed past her shoulders, and the gray asylum dress hung loosely on her thin frame. But it was her eyes that held him. They were clear and sharp and utterly, completely sane. "Miss Lincoln," the superintendent said with forced cheer, "you have a visitor." Delilah's gaze moved from the superintendent to Augustus, and he watched her assess him with the same careful attention he used when tracking game through difficult terrain. She said nothing, but her hands folded carefully in her lap, and she tilted her head slightly, waiting. Augustus stepped forward, removing his hat. "Miss Lincoln, my name is Augustus Xavier. I was with your father when he died this past January up in the mountains near South Pass. He asked me to come here to check on you, to help you if I could." Something flickered across her face, so quick he almost missed it. Pain, maybe, or hope, or both. "He said to tell you that he never stopped loving you," Augustus continued, his deep voice gentle in the small room. "He said your stepmother lied about you, had you committed so she could control the family ranch. He was too sick by the time he realized what she had done, too far gone to come back and fix it. He made me promise I would come here and see the truth for myself." Delilah's lips parted slightly, and her eyes grew bright with unshed tears, but still she did not speak. The superintendent cleared his throat. "As you can see, she is quite unresponsive. This is typical behavior for her. I am afraid your journey may have been wasted, Mr. Xavier." Augustus ignored him, crouching down so he was at eye level with Delilah. Up close, he could see the fine bones of her face, the intelligence in her eyes, the way her fingers gripped the fabric of her dress as if holding on to her sanity by force of will alone. "I do not think you are mad," he said quietly. "I think you are about as sane as anyone I have ever met, maybe more so, considering where they have had you caged up. Your father said you would not speak because the doctors used your words against you, twisted everything you said into proof of madness. He said you learned to be silent because silence could not be misinterpreted." A single tear rolled down Delilah's cheek. Her mouth moved, forming words without sound, and Augustus understood. She was asking a question, the same question anyone would ask in her position. "Can I take you out of here?" he repeated, reading her lips. He looked up at the superintendent. "What would it take to have her released into my custody?" The superintendent blinked rapidly. "Well, that is highly irregular. There are procedures, evaluations, legal documents. Her stepmother would have to be notified as next of kin." "Her stepmother is the reason she is here," Augustus said, rising to his full height. The superintendent took an involuntary step backward. Augustus had that effect on people when he wanted to. Years of surviving by strength and will had carved him into something formidable. "I have documents from Thomas Lincoln, written before he died and witnessed by a mining camp magistrate. They state that his second wife, Margaret Lincoln, committed fraud in having his daughter institutionalized, and that Delilah Lincoln is of sound mind and should be released immediately into the care of someone trustworthy." This was not entirely true. Thomas had written such a letter, but Augustus had no idea if it held any legal weight. He had survived in the wilderness long enough to know that sometimes you had to bluff your way through situations, just like you would with a territorial predator. The superintendent wavered. "I would need to see these documents." "They are with a lawyer in Cheyenne," Augustus said smoothly, "waiting to be filed with the territorial court. I came here first as a courtesy to assess Miss Lincoln's condition myself. But I can go straight to Cheyenne and return with a federal marshal if you would prefer to make this difficult." It was a gamble. The superintendent could call his bluff, could demand Augustus leave immediately, but Augustus had read him correctly. The man was tired, overwhelmed, and probably did not care much about one patient more or less. He certainly did not want the trouble of lawyers and marshals poking around his facility. "If you are willing to take full responsibility for her care and well-being," the superintendent said slowly, "and if you sign documents stating that you do so of your own free will and absolve this institution of any liability, then I suppose we could arrange a release." It would actually free up a bed we desperately need. Augustus nodded once, short and sharp. Draw up the papers. It took 2 hours to complete the process. Augustus signed his name a dozen times, his handwriting rough but legible. Delilah was brought fresh clothes, donated items that did not fit well but were better than the asylum dress, a simple brown skirt and cream blouse that hung loosely on her frame. She changed in privacy while Augustus waited in the front hall, his mind racing with the reality of what he had just done. He had taken responsibility for a woman he did not know, based on the word of a dying man and his own instinct. He had no plan beyond getting her out of this place. He lived alone in a cabin high in the Medicine Bow Mountains, a 3-day ride from the nearest town. His life was solitary, harsh, built around survival and the rhythms of nature. What was he supposed to do with a woman who had spent 3 years locked in a cell, who had not spoken in God knew how long? But when Delilah emerged, her hair brushed and braided by one of the attendants, wearing those ill-fitting clothes and carrying nothing but the life she had left, Augustus knew he had made the right choice. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she smiled. It was small, tentative, like a wild thing testing whether it was truly free, but it transformed her face. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. They walked out of the Wyoming Territorial Asylum together into the bright afternoon sunshine. Delilah stopped on the front steps, tilting her face up to the sun, breathing deeply. Augustus stood beside her, patient, understanding that she needed this moment. His pack mule stood waiting along with his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Ranger. "It is about 3 days' ride to my cabin," Augustus said as they reached the animals. "We will need to stop in town first, get you some proper supplies, boots, warm clothes, provisions, but then we will head up into the mountains. It is isolated up there, Miss Lincoln. The nearest neighbor is 2 days' ride away. Winter comes early and stays late. It is beautiful but harsh. If you would rather I take you somewhere else, to another town, to relatives, I will understand." Delilah turned to him. She reached out slowly and her hand, pale and thin, touched his arm. Her lips moved, and though no sound came out, he understood her meaning. She had nowhere else to go. She trusted him because her father had, and that was enough. Augustus nodded. "All right then. Let us get you home." They rode into Laramie as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The town was bustling with the usual activity of a summer evening. Cowboys coming in from the ranches, miners spending their earnings, families completing their errands before supper. Augustus led them to the general store, a large building on the main street that sold everything from calico to coffee to cartridges. Inside, the shopkeeper's wife, a motherly woman named Rose who had known Augustus for years, took one look at Delilah and clucked her tongue. "Augustus Xavier, who is this poor dear, and why does she look like she has not had a decent meal in months?" "This is Miss Delilah Lincoln," Augustus said. "She has had a hard time of it and needs outfitting for mountain living. Can you help her with clothes while I get supplies?" Rose's eyes narrowed as she studied Delilah more closely, taking in the hollow cheeks and the way the clothes hung on her frame. "She came from that awful place outside town, did she not? I can always tell. They have a look about them." She turned to Delilah, her voice softening. "Come with me, dear. We will get you fixed up properly." Delilah glanced at Augustus, uncertainty in her eyes. "It is all right," he said gently. "Rose is good people. I will be right over there getting supplies. You can see me the whole time." She nodded and followed Rose to the back of the store where the women's clothing was kept. Augustus watched for a moment, then turned to the task of gathering what they would need: flour, salt, sugar, coffee, dried beans, bacon, ammunition, matches, lamp oil. He added things he had not bought in years, items for a woman's comfort. Soap that smelled of lavender, a good brush and comb, fabric for making additional clothes, needles and thread. The shopkeeper, Rose's husband Edward, rang up the purchases with raised eyebrows but said nothing. Augustus paid in cash, gold coins earned from selling his furs the previous spring. He had lived frugally for years, spending little, saving most. He had more than enough to provide for himself and Delilah. Rose emerged with Delilah dressed in new clothes, a practical split skirt for riding, a warm flannel shirt, a leather vest, and sturdy boots. She carried a bundle of additional items, undergarments and nightclothes, and a warm coat for when the weather turned. "She still has not spoken a word," Rose said quietly to Augustus, "but her eyes are sharp. I do not think there is anything wrong with her mind, Augustus. I think she has been hurt badly and learned that silence is safer than speech." "That is what I think too," Augustus agreed. He looked at Delilah, who was running her hands over the soft fabric of her new clothes with something like wonder. "Thank you, Rose. You take care of her," Rose said firmly, "and bring her back to visit when you come down for winter supplies. I would like to know how she is doing." They left the store loaded with supplies. Augustus secured everything on the pack mule, then helped Delilah mount Ranger. "Have you ridden before?" he asked. She nodded, settling into the saddle with an ease that suggested familiarity. Of course, her father had owned a ranch. She would have grown up riding. Augustus swung up behind her, his arms coming around to hold the reins. It was the most practical arrangement with only 2 animals and this much gear, but he was conscious of her stiffness, the way she held herself away from him as much as possible in the confined space. He kept his touch light, professional, giving her as much space as the saddle allowed. They rode out of Laramie as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Augustus planned to make camp a few hours north, away from town, away from people who might ask questions or cause trouble. Delilah's stepmother was somewhere in the territory, and Augustus did not want to risk running into anyone who might recognize Delilah and send word to the woman. They found a good spot near a creek, sheltered by cottonwood trees. Augustus helped Delilah down from the horse, then set about making camp with the efficiency of long practice. He had a fire going in minutes, coffee brewing soon after. Delilah watched him work, sitting on a fallen log he had positioned near the fire, her new coat wrapped around her shoulders though the evening was still warm. Augustus prepared a simple meal of bacon and beans, heating them in his battered skillet. He handed Delilah a plate and watched as she ate slowly, carefully, as if her stomach had forgotten how to handle real food. She managed about half before setting the plate aside. "It is all right," Augustus said. "Your body needs time to adjust. We will go slow." She looked at him across the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on her face. Then, for the second time that day, she smiled. It was stronger this time, more certain, and Augustus felt that strange shift in his chest again, like something was settling into place. He cleaned the dishes in the creek while Delilah sat by the fire. When he returned, he set up his bedroll on one side of the fire and laid out the extra blankets Rose had insisted he buy on the opposite side. "You sleep there," he said, pointing to the far side. "I will be over here." "You are safe, Miss Lincoln. I want you to know that. I made a promise to your father to look after you, and I keep my promises. But I also want you to know that you are free. If you decide you want to leave, want to go somewhere else, I will take you wherever you want to go. You are not my prisoner and you owe me nothing. Understood?" Delilah studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face in the firelight. Then she nodded slowly, and some of the tension left her shoulders. They settled in for the night, the fire crackling between them, the stars emerging in the vast Wyoming sky above. Augustus lay on his back, his hands behind his head, watching the constellations wheel overhead. He heard Delilah shift on her bedroll, adjusting to sleeping on the ground after 3 years on a thin asylum mattress. "The mountains are beautiful this time of year," he said quietly, speaking into the darkness. "Green and wild, full of life. The creek near my cabin runs cold and clear, straight from snowmelt. There are elk and deer, wildflowers in the meadows, eagles overhead. It is a good place to heal if a body is needing to heal." He heard her breath catch just slightly and knew she was listening. "I was not always a mountain man," he continued. "I grew up in Pennsylvania in a city. My father was a banker, wanted me to follow in his footsteps. But I could not breathe there, all those buildings and people and expectations. When I was 20, I headed west and never looked back. Been in these mountains for 15 years now. They have been hard on me sometimes, brutal even, but they have been honest. There is no pretense in the wild. A thing is what it is. I learned to appreciate that." Silence, then he heard her voice, so soft he almost missed it. "Thank you." Augustus sat up, looking across the fire. Delilah was propped up on one elbow, looking at him, tears streaming down her face. Her voice was hoarse from disuse but clear. "Thank you for coming for me," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked through me. Thank you for believing my father." Augustus felt something swell in his chest, pride and protectiveness, and something else he did not have a name for yet. "You are welcome, Miss Lincoln. Now get some rest. We have hard riding ahead tomorrow." She lay back down, and Augustus did the same. But he lay awake long into the night, listening to the sound of her breathing even out into sleep, feeling the weight of responsibility and possibility settle over him like a familiar coat. They rose with the dawn, ate a quick breakfast of coffee and hardtack, and continued north into the mountains. The terrain grew steadily rougher, the prairie giving way to foothills covered in pine and aspen. Augustus set a moderate pace, conscious of Delilah's condition. She sat straight in the saddle, her body swaying with the horse's rhythm, but he could see the fatigue in the set of her shoulders by midday. They stopped to rest beside a clear stream, and Augustus filled their canteens while Delilah sat on a sun-warmed rock, tilting her face to the light. The ride had brought color to her cheeks, and her eyes seemed brighter than they had the day before. "How are you holding up?" Augustus asked, offering her some dried meat and bread. "Better than I expected," she said, her voice still quiet but growing stronger. "I had forgotten how good it feels to move, to be outside. They only let us out into a small yard once a week, and even then, we were just walked in circles like animals." Augustus felt anger kindle in his gut, but he kept his voice calm. "You will never go back there. I promise you that." Delilah looked at him with those clear, intelligent eyes. "You do not know me, Mr. Xavier. Why are you doing this? Just because of a promise to my father?" It was a fair question. Augustus settled onto a rock across from her, his forearms resting on his knees. "I met your father in a mining camp. He was dying, knew it, but still had tried to make it back to civilization to get help for you. The cold had gotten into his lungs, and he was not going to last the week. But all he talked about was you, about how he had failed you, let his second wife convince him you were having spells, seeing things that were not there. By the time he realized she had lied, had you committed so she could control the ranch and the money, he was too sick to travel back. It ate at him, Miss Lincoln. In his last days, it was all he could think about." He paused, remembering Thomas Lincoln's labored breathing, the way the old man had gripped his arm with surprising strength. "He made me promise I would check on you, see if what he suspected was true. And if it was, if you were sane and wrongly imprisoned, he made me swear I would get you out. I have done things I am not proud of in my life, but I have never broken a promise. So I came and I saw, and yeah, Miss Lincoln, you are about the sanest person I have met in a long time. So here we are." Delilah was quiet for a moment, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her skirt. "My stepmother convinced everyone I was having delusions. She said I saw spirits, heard voices, that I was dangerous to myself and others. The truth was much simpler. I walked in on her with one of the ranch hands in my father's bed while he was away buying cattle. When I confronted her, told her I would tell my father, she panicked. Within a week, she had convinced him I was mad, had doctors examine me who heard only what she told them to hear. I tried to tell the truth, but every word I spoke was twisted into evidence of my insanity." Her voice broke slightly, but she continued, "After 6 months in that place, I realized that speaking only made things worse. So I stopped. I sat silently through their examinations, their treatments, their attempts to make me admit to delusions I never had. And slowly, the world forgot about me. My father stopped visiting after a year, probably convinced by Margaret that I was too far gone. I thought I would die there." Augustus stood and moved to sit beside her, close but not touching. "You did not die. You survived. That took strength, Miss Lincoln, more strength than most people ever have to find." She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the weathered face and long hair and massive frame to whatever lay beneath. "Call me Delilah, please. I think we are past formalities." "Delilah," he said, and liked the way her name felt in his mouth. "Call me Augustus or Gus if you prefer." "Most folks called me Gus before I headed into the mountains full time." "Augustus," she said, trying it out. "It suits you. Strong, old-fashioned, dependable," he smiled, a rare expression that softened his rugged features. "Come on. We have a few more hours of riding before we need to make camp for the night." The afternoon passed in comfortable silence. Delilah seemed content to watch the landscape change as they climbed higher, the air growing thinner and cooler, the trees taller and more dense. Augustus pointed out landmarks, showing her the way to read the mountains, how to tell direction by the sun and stars, which plants were safe to eat and which would make a person sick. She absorbed it all with the hunger of someone starved for knowledge and engagement. In the asylum, her world had shrunk to the size of a cell. Now it was expanding with every mile, and Augustus could see her coming back to life like a flower, opening to the sun. They made camp that night in a small meadow ringed by towering pines. A family of deer grazed at the far end, watching them with liquid eyes before bounding away into the trees. Augustus set up camp while Delilah gathered firewood, moving slowly but with purpose. Over dinner, she began to ask questions. About his life in the mountains, about how he survived the winters, about whether he was ever lonely. Augustus answered honestly, surprised by how easy it was to talk to her. He had spent so many years alone that conversation had become a rusty skill, but with Delilah, it felt natural. "Yes, I get lonely sometimes," he admitted, staring into the fire. "Winters are the hardest. The snow gets deep, sometimes over the cabin roof. I can go months without seeing another person. But I have always preferred my own company to bad company, and there is a peace in the solitude that I value." "Will you mind having me there?" Delilah asked quietly. "Disrupting your solitude?" Augustus looked at her, this woman who had been through hell and somehow come out with her soul intact. "No," he said simply. "I do not think I will mind at all." The third day of travel took them deep into the Medicine Bow Range. The trail, such as it was, became steep and treacherous in places, winding through narrow passes and across rushing streams. Augustus dismounted several times to lead the horse across the most difficult sections, his hand steadying Delilah when she needed it. By afternoon, They crested a ridge, and Augustus reined in the horse, letting Delilah see what lay ahead. The valley spread below them, a sweeping expanse of green meadows and dark forest with a crystalline creek running through its heart. High above, snow-capped peaks thrust into the brilliant blue sky, and there, nestled against the tree line, was Augustus's cabin. It was larger than Delilah had expected, built from hand-hewn logs and river stone, with a wide porch and a stone chimney. A small barn stood nearby, and a garden plot showed green with growing vegetables. "Home," Augustus said simply. They descended into the valley as the sun began its long summer descent. Augustus's animals, 2 horses and a milk cow he had left with enough fodder to last, greeted them with pleased whinnies and moos. He tended to them first, showing Delilah how to care for each one, where the feed was kept, how to check their water. Then he opened the cabin door and stood back, letting her enter first. The interior was neat and well organized, far cleaner than she had expected from a bachelor. One large room served as living space and kitchen, with a massive stone fireplace taking up one wall. A door led to what she assumed was a bedroom, and a ladder went up to a loft space under the eaves. "You take the bedroom," Augustus said, carrying in their supplies. "I will sleep in the loft. There is a root cellar out back for keeping things cool, and the creek has the coldest, clearest water you have ever tasted. Outhouse is behind the barn." Delilah walked slowly through the space, trailing her fingers over the rough-hewn table, the handmade chairs, the shelves lined with books. "You raid," she said with surprise. Augustus looked almost embarrassed. "Long winters, not much else to do. I have been collecting books for years. Trade for them when I go to town. You are welcome to read any of them." She pulled one from the shelf, a volume of poetry by Walt Whitman, and opened it carefully. Inside the cover, in careful script, was written property of Augustus Xavier, 1877. She looked up at him with wonder. "I have not read anything in 3 years except the Bible they forced on us. I think I might have missed books even more than freedom." "Then we have something in common," Augustus said. "Make yourself at home, Delilah. This is your place now, too." The days fell into a rhythm. Augustus rose early, tending to the animals and checking his trap lines. Delilah woke to the smell of coffee and whatever breakfast he had prepared. Simple but filling meals that slowly helped her regain the weight she had lost. After breakfast, Augustus would work on the endless tasks required to maintain a homestead in the mountains while Delilah began to explore her new home. She started with the books, reading voraciously, making up for lost time. Then she began to help with chores, learning to milk the cow, tend the garden, preserve food for the coming winter. Augustus taught her to fish in the creek, how to recognize animal tracks, how to move quietly through the forest. Every evening, they sat on the porch as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. Augustus told her about his travels through the Rockies, about surviving a grisly attack that left the scars on his shoulder, about the time he had been trapped in his cabin for 6 weeks during a blizzard and nearly gone mad from the confinement. Delilah told him about her childhood, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about learning to run her father's ranch alongside him until Margaret had come into their lives. She talked about the early days in the asylum, about learning to retreat into her mind to survive, about the other women there who truly were mad and how she had feared becoming like them. "I used to recite books to myself," she said one evening, watching the stars emerge. "Everything I had memorized, poetry, passages from novels, even arithmetic tables, anything to keep my mind active, to prove to myself that I was still sane, still me." Augustus reached over and took her hand, the first time he had voluntarily touched her beyond helping her mount the horse or cross a stream. His hand was rough and warm, and Delilah did not pull away. "You are still you," he said firmly. "Maybe stronger than you were before. It takes incredible strength to survive what you survived." She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, illuminated by the last rays of sunlight. "I think I am starting to heal," she said quietly. "I did not think I would ever be able to, but here, with you, I can feel myself coming back together." Augustus felt his heart hammer in his chest. Somewhere over the past weeks, Delilah had stopped being a responsibility, a promise to keep. She had become something else entirely, something precious and vital. He was falling in love with her, this woman who had survived hell and come out fighting, who sat on his porch reading poetry and learning to live again. But she was fragile still, healing, and he would not rush her. He would wait as long as she needed, even if it meant keeping his feelings locked away forever. Summer deepened into early autumn. The aspen trees began to turn gold, and the nights grew crisp. Delilah bloomed like a late-season flower, gaining weight and strength, her laughter coming more easily, her smiles more frequent. She moved around the cabin and property with increasing confidence, no longer a guest but a true partner in the daily work of living. Augustus watched her hang laundry one morning, singing softly to herself, and felt such a surge of emotion that he had to turn away. He was in love with her, deeply and completely, and he had no idea what to do about it. The answer came from an unexpected source. They had ridden down to the lower valley to check on a line of traps Augustus had set, hoping to catch some early-season beaver. Delilah rode her own horse now, a gentle mare Augustus had traded for in a nearby settlement. She sat the horse with easy confidence, her hair in a braid down her back, wearing the practical clothes of a mountain woman. They were returning home, riding side by side through a narrow canyon, when Augustus heard the sound that made his blood run cold. Rattlesnake, and close. His horse shied, and Augustus dismounted quickly, trying to locate the threat before either horse could bolt and throw their rider. He spotted the snake coiled on a rock at the same moment Delilah's mare saw it. The horse reared in panic, and Delilah, caught off guard, lost her seat. She fell hard, hitting the rocky ground with a cry of pain. Augustus had his rifle off his saddle and the snake's head blown off in less than 3 seconds, but his focus was entirely on Delilah. He dropped beside her, his hands hovering over her, checking for injuries. "My ankle," she gasped, her face white with pain. "I think I twisted it." Augustus gently probed the ankle and Delilah hissed in pain. It was already beginning to swell. Not broken, he thought with relief, but badly sprained. He looked around, calculating distances. They were a good hour from the cabin and she could not ride. "I am going to carry you," he said. "Augustus, I am too heavy. You cannot carry me for an hour." He almost laughed. After years of hauling beaver pelts and supplies through mountain passes, carrying Delilah was nothing. "Trust me," he said, and scooped her up as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. She gasped, her arms going around his neck automatically. "This is ridiculous. Put me down." "Not a chance." He whistled for his horse, which trotted over obediently. The mare had bolted but would find her way home. Augustus looped his horse's reins over one arm and started walking. Delilah held securely against his chest. After a few minutes of protest, Delilah gave up and let herself relax against him. She could feel the solid mass of his chest, the powerful muscles that carried her effortlessly through rough terrain. His heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear, and his arms held her with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his size and strength. "I am sorry," she murmured. "I should have been more careful. Not your fault. That snake was well hidden. I am just glad it was only a sprained ankle." He adjusted his grip slightly, holding her closer. "I would not survive losing you, Delilah." She pulled back to look at his face, reading the emotion there. "Augustus." He met her eyes, and in that moment she saw everything he had been carefully hiding. Love, desire, devotion, all written plainly on his rugged features. "I love you," he said simply. "I did not mean to, did not plan on it. But somewhere between pulling you out of that asylum and teaching you to milk the cow, I fell completely in love with you. I know you might not feel the same way. I know you are still healing, still finding yourself again, and that is fine. I will wait, Delilah. I will wait as long as you need, and if you decide you can never love me back, I will accept that too. But I needed you to know." Delilah's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Put me down," she said. Augustus looked alarmed. "Your ankle. Put me down, please." He carefully set her on her good foot, keeping his arms around her for support. Delilah reached up, her hands framing his bearded face, and pulled him down to kiss her. It was tentative at first, exploratory, but when Augustus responded with gentle passion, she melted into him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Delilah smiled up at him. "I love you too, Augustus Xavier. I think I have loved you since you looked at me in that cell and saw me, really saw me, when everyone else just saw a madwoman. You gave me back my life, my freedom, myself. How could I not love you?" Augustus crushed her against him, his face buried in her hair, and Delilah felt the shudder that went through his powerful frame. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this," he said hoarsely. "I know," she said simply. Then she laughed. "Now please pick me up again before I fall over. My ankle really does hurt." He lifted her with a laugh of his own, and they continued home. Everything changed, and yet somehow exactly as it was meant to be. Augustus tended to Delilah's ankle with the same competent care he applied to everything. He wrapped it snugly, elevated it, and made her promise to stay off it for at least a few days. Delilah endured his fussing with amused patience, secure in the knowledge that his worry came from love. That night, as they sat by the fire, Augustus in his chair and Delilah on the couch with her foot propped up, she asked the question that had been on her mind. "What happens now?" Augustus looked at her, firelight dancing across his strong features. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to stay here with you. I want to build a life in these mountains. But I also know that eventually people will ask questions. An unmarried man and woman living together will cause talk, even out here." Augustus nodded slowly. "I have been thinking about that. There is a circuit preacher who comes through the settlements twice a year. He is due in about 2 weeks. If you are willing, if you want to, we could ride down and have him marry us." Delilah's heart swelled. "Are you asking me to marry you, Augustus Xavier?" He stood and came to kneel beside the couch, taking her hand in both of his. "Delilah Lincoln, I know we have not known each other long, and I know you have been through things that would break most people. I am not smooth with words, and I do not have much to offer except a cabin in the mountains and a heart that belongs completely to you. But if you will have me, I promise to love you and protect you and stand by you for the rest of my days. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Delilah said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Augustus, I will marry you." He surged up to kiss her, gentle and reverent, and Delilah felt the last piece of her fractured soul slide back into place. She was whole again, healed and in love with the mountain man who had saved her. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Delilah's ankle healed quickly, and she was soon back on her feet, helping Augustus prepare for the journey down to the settlement. They would need to go anyway, to stock up on supplies before winter set in, so the timing worked out well. The settlement of Twin Pines was less a town and more a collection of cabins and supply buildings scattered along a wide creek. Perhaps 20 families called it home, along with a trading post, a blacksmith, and the small church where the circuit preacher held services when he was in the area. Augustus and Delilah arrived on a bright September morning to find the settlement already gathering for Sunday service. The preacher, a weathered man in his 50s named Reverend Hartley, greeted them warmly. "Augustus Xavier, I have not seen you in near about 2 years. And who is this lovely lady?" "This is Delilah Lincoln," Augustus said, his hand warm on the small of her back. "We would like to be married, Reverend, if you are willing." Reverend Hartley's eyebrows rose slightly, but his smile never wavered. "Well, that is wonderful news. Are you wanting to wait until I come through again, or would you like to do it today?" Augustus looked at Delilah, who nodded. "Today, if possible," he said. "Today it is then. Let me just finish the regular service and we will have ourselves a wedding." Word spread quickly through the small community, and by the time the regular service ended, everyone had gathered to witness the wedding. Augustus stood at the front of the church, his long hair tied back neatly, wearing his cleanest shirt and a new vest he had purchased from the trading post. He looked uncomfortable in the church setting, a wild thing temporarily tamed, but his eyes never left Delilah. She walked down the short aisle in a simple dress, also new from the trading post, pale blue cotton that brought out her eyes. She had no family here, no one to give her away, but she did not need anyone. She had chosen this for herself, chosen Augustus and the life they would build together. The ceremony was brief and simple, but the words carried weight. "I, Augustus, take you, Delilah, to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. I, Delilah, take you, Augustus, to be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Reverend Hartley pronounced them man and wife, and when Augustus kissed her, gentle and sweet, the small congregation erupted in applause. Delilah laughed against his lips, joy bubbling up from deep inside her. 6 months ago, she had been locked in a cell with no hope of escape. Now she was married to a man she loved, standing in a church surrounded by strangers who welcomed her, with a future spread out before her like the vast Wyoming sky. The community threw together an impromptu celebration, with food and drink and music from a fiddler who lived in one of the outlying cabins. Augustus, who had lived on the edge of this community for years without really being part of it, was pulled into conversations and congratulations. Delilah watched him, seeing how uncomfortable he was with the attention, and took pity on him. "Let us go home, husband," she said quietly, coming to stand beside him. Relief flooded his face. "You do not mind leaving early?" "I would rather be alone with you in our cabin than here with all these people, no matter how kind they are." They made their excuses and rode out in the golden afternoon light, their pack animals loaded with supplies. When they were well clear of the settlement, Augustus reached across the space between their horses and took Delilah's hand. "How are you feeling, wife?" "Happy," she said simply. "Happier than I have ever been. How are you feeling, husband?" "Like the luckiest man in the Wyoming Territory." He grinned at her, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. "Let us get home before dark." They made it to the cabin just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Augustus helped Delilah down from her horse, but instead of releasing her, he swept her up in his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed. "Carrying my wife over the threshold," he said, pushing open the cabin door with his shoulder. "It is tradition." He set her down gently in the middle of the cabin, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other in the gathering darkness. Then Augustus moved to light the lamps, and the warm glow filled the space. "I should see to the horses," he said, but made no move to leave. "They can wait a few minutes," Delilah said softly. She moved closer to him, her hands coming to rest on his chest. "Augustus, I know what happens on a wedding night. I want you to know that I am not afraid. I trust you completely." Augustus cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "We do not have to do anything tonight if you are not ready. We have the rest of our lives." "I am ready," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I am healed, Augustus. You healed me. Now let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, pouring all his love and desire into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I will be right back. I am going to take care of the horses, and then I am going to come back here and love my wife properly." Delilah laughed, the sound pure and joyful. "Hurry back." He did, making record time with the evening chores. When he came back into the cabin, Delilah had changed into her nightgown and was standing by the window, looking out at the stars. She turned when he entered, and the love shining in her eyes took his breath away. That night, in the bedroom of their cabin, with the mountain wind sighing through the pines outside, Augustus and Delilah came together as husband and wife. He was gentle and patient, mindful always of what she had been through, but Delilah met him with a passion that surprised them both. This was about more than physical joining. It was about healing, about claiming their future, about two broken people making each other whole. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Delilah's head on Augustus's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. "I love you," she murmured sleepily. "I love you too," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Sleep now, wife. We have the rest of our lives ahead of us." The first winter of their marriage tested them in ways neither had anticipated. The snow came early that year, heavy and relentless, sealing them into their valley by early November. By December, the drifts were higher than the windows, and the temperature dropped so low that the water in the bucket by the door froze solid overnight despite the fire. But inside the cabin, there was warmth. Augustus taught Delilah how to make bullets, how to repair snowshoes, how to cure hides. Delilah read to him in the evenings, her voice bringing to life adventures and romances and histories. They played chess on a set Augustus had carved years ago, and Delilah proved a worthy opponent, winning as often as she lost. They talked for hours, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their future, observations about everything and nothing. They made love in the deep cold of winter nights, finding warmth and comfort in each other. And slowly, day by day, they built a marriage that was solid and true. It was in late January, when the snow was deepest and the nights were longest, that Delilah realized she was with child. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had wanted to be certain before saying anything. Now, watching Augustus split wood outside the cabin, his breath pluming in the frigid air, his powerful shoulders straining with each swing of the axe, she knew it was time to tell him. That evening after dinner, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Augustus, I have news." He looked at her, confused, then his eyes widened as understanding dawned. We are going to have a baby," she said, laughing at the expression on his face. "Probably sometime in late summer, if I am calculating correctly." Augustus dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands spanning her waist, his face pressed against her stomach. She felt him shudder and realized he was crying. She ran her fingers through his long hair, soothing him. "I never thought," he said hoarsely. "I never imagined I would have this. A wife, a child, a family. Delilah, "I know," she said softly. "I feel the same way. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now I have everything I could ever want." He looked up at her, tears streaking his weathered face. "I am going to be a father. You are going to be a wonderful father," she corrected. "Just like you are a wonderful husband." The rest of the winter passed with new purpose. Augustus began working on a cradle, carving it from smooth pine and polishing it until it gleamed. Delilah began making baby clothes from soft cloth, her needle flashing in the lamplight as she sewed tiny gowns and blankets. They talked about names, about how they would arrange the cabin to accommodate a baby, about all the changes that were coming. Augustus became even more protective, insisting Delilah avoid any strenuous work, fussing over her until she laughingly told him she was pregnant, not broken. Spring came late, the snow not fully melting until May. As soon as the passes were clear enough to travel, Augustus insisted they go down to Twin Pines so Delilah could see the doctor who visited there once a month. The doctor, an older man who had been practicing medicine since before the Civil War, examined Delilah and pronounced her and the baby healthy. "You are doing everything right, Mrs. Xavier," he said with a kind smile. "Keep eating well, get plenty of rest, and you should have no trouble. Your baby should arrive sometime in late August or early September." They returned home with supplies and books on childbirth that Augustus had insisted on purchasing. Delilah found his worry endearing, though she assured him that women had been having babies for thousands of years without medical books. Summer bloomed across their valley, painting the meadows with wildflowers and filling the air with the scent of pine and growing things. Delilah's belly swelled with their growing child, and Augustus became convinced she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He would spend hours just watching her, his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick and move. "He is going to be strong," Augustus said one evening as a particularly vigorous kick made Delilah wince. "Or she," Delilah corrected. "We do not know if it is a boy or girl yet." "True." Augustus kissed her stomach gently. "Either way, this baby is going to be loved beyond measure." Labor came on a hot August afternoon while Delilah was in the garden picking beans. She straightened with a gasp, her hand going to her lower back, and felt the first contraction grip her. Augustus, who was repairing a fence nearby, saw her expression and dropped his tools immediately. "Is it time?" he asked, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. "I think so," Delilah said, breathing through the contraction. "But we have hours yet, most likely. Help me inside and then try not to worry." "Try not to worry," she said, as if that were possible. Augustus settled her in their bed, piled with clean linens he had prepared weeks ago under Delilah's direction. He had water boiling, had all the supplies the doctor had told them they would need. Now there was nothing to do but wait and let nature take its course. The hours crawled by. Augustus held Delilah's hand through each contraction, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, supported her when she needed to walk to ease the pain. She was incredibly brave, he thought, making it through each contraction with gritted teeth and determination. As night fell and the pains grew closer together, Augustus began to pray, something he had not done in years. "Please," he thought desperately, "let them both be all right. I cannot lose her. I cannot lose either of them." Finally, as the moon rose high and bright outside their window, the baby came. Augustus, following the instructions from the medical books, caught his child and felt his heart expand to impossible size. A boy, healthy and squalling, with a shock of dark hair in his mother's eyes. "A son," he said hoarsely, placing the baby on Delilah's chest. "We have a son." Delilah was exhausted and radiant, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her smile tremulous but real. She looked down at their son with wonder. He is perfect. Augustus, he is absolutely perfect. Augustus finished the necessary tasks with shaking hands, then cleaned up mother and child before collapsing beside them on the bed. He wrapped his arms around them both, protective and possessive, and let the tears come freely. "Thank you," he whispered against Delilah's temple. "Thank you for surviving the asylum. Thank you for giving me a chance. Thank you for this son. Thank you for everything." Delilah turned her head to kiss him softly. "I should be thanking you. You saved me, Augustus, in every way a person can be saved." They named their son Thomas, after Delilah's father, and he brought a new dimension to their lives. Augustus proved to be a devoted father, wearing the baby in a sling against his massive chest as he did chores, singing off key lullabies in the middle of the night, marveling at every milestone. Delilah flourished as a mother, her natural warmth and intelligence shaping their son's early days. She healed from the birth quickly, and within weeks was back to her regular routine, though now it included nursing and caring for Thomas. The years flowed by like the creek that ran past their cabin, steady and sure. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's strength and his mother's sharp mind. He learned to walk on the cabin floor, took his first steps from Augustus to Delilah and back again. He learned to talk, his first word "mama" quickly followed by "papa." When Thomas was 3, Delilah became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and Augustus was slightly less panicked, though he still fussed over her constantly. Their daughter arrived on a snowy March evening, tiny and perfect with blonde hair and her father's gray eyes. They named her Rose after the kind shopkeeper's wife who had helped Delilah that first day. Augustus was completely undone by his daughter. This gruff mountain man who had survived grizzlies and blizzards melted like spring snow the first time Rose wrapped her tiny hand around his finger. Delilah would find him just standing by the cradle, watching Rose sleep, a look of absolute wonder on his face. "I never knew," he said one night as Delilah joined him. "I never knew a heart could hold this much love." "Neither did I," Delilah agreed, leaning against his solid warmth. "But I am grateful every day that we found each other, that we have this life." When Thomas was 6 and Rose was 3, they made a trip down to Laramie. It was time to face the past, Delilah had decided. Her stepmother still controlled the ranch her father had built, and while Delilah had no desire to reclaim it, she wanted to officially relinquish any legal claim so that Margaret could never use it as an excuse to cause trouble. They left the children with a family in Twin Pines and rode into Laramie on a bright May morning. The town had grown in the 8 years since Delilah had left the asylum, more buildings, more people, more civilization encroaching on the wild. The lawyer's office was new, the lawyer young but competent. He listened to Delilah's story without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Mrs. Xavier, what was done to you was unconscionable," he said when she finished. "You would be well within your rights to file charges against Margaret Lincoln for fraud and false imprisonment." Delilah shook her head. "I have no interest in revenge or legal battles. I just want to sign whatever papers are necessary to remove myself permanently from any claim to my father's estate. I want no connection to that woman or that life." The lawyer nodded and drew up the papers. Within an hour, it was done. Delilah Lincoln Xavier had officially relinquished all claims to her father's ranch in exchange for a sum of money that Margaret had been only too happy to pay. It was a fraction of what the ranch was worth, but Delilah did not care. She wanted closure, not money. As they left the lawyer's office, they passed the asylum. It loomed on its hill, unchanged and unchanging. Delilah stared at it for a long moment, and Augustus took her hand. "You want to stop?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. No, that place has no power over me anymore. I survived it, and I have built a beautiful life in spite of it. That is the best revenge I could ever have." They rode out of Laramie and back toward the mountains, toward home, toward the life they had built together. Behind them, the asylum faded into the distance, a bad memory growing smaller with every mile. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, learning to trap and hunt and read the mountains. Rose grew into a bright, curious child who could read before she was 4 and drove her parents to distraction with her endless questions. When Rose was 5, Delilah discovered she was pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, leaving her tired and sick for months. Augustus hovered constantly, and even the children learned to be quiet and helpful, sensing their mother needed extra care. The baby, another boy they named James, arrived on a cold November evening. He came early and small, and for the first few weeks, Augustus and Delilah were not sure he would survive. But James proved as stubborn as his parents, clinging to life with fierce determination. By spring, he had caught up to where he should be, healthy and thriving. "That is it," Augustus declared when James was 6 months old, and Delilah was clearly exhausted from nursing and caring for 3 children while maintaining a mountain homestead. "No more babies. I am not willing to risk your health again." Delilah, who was thinking the exact same thing, agreed readily. 3 children were plenty, more than either of them had ever dreamed of having. As the children grew, the cabin seemed to shrink. Augustus began plans for an addition, a second bedroom and a larger kitchen. It took him 2 years, working in the spare time he could find, but eventually the cabin doubled in size. Now Thomas had his own small room in the loft, while Rose and James shared the new bedroom. Augustus and Delilah finally had privacy again, which they appreciated more than they had anticipated. Life in the mountains was hard but good. They had lean years when the trapping was poor or the garden failed, and they had abundant years when everything seemed to go right. Through it all, Augustus and Delilah stood together, their love deepening with each passing season. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Augustus took Delilah on a picnic to the meadow where he had first told her he loved her. The children were old enough to be left alone for a few hours, with strict instructions to stay in the cabin and out of trouble. They sat on a blanket in the warm September sun, eating bread and cheese and dried fruit. Delilah leaned back against Augustus's broad chest, his arms around her, and sighed with contentment. "You ever regret it?" Augustus asked quietly. "Marrying me, living up here so far from civilization?" Delilah twisted to look at him, shocked. "Never. Augustus, these have been the best years of my life. Every single day I wake up grateful. Grateful that my father sent you to me, grateful that you saw me when no one else would, grateful for this life we have built." "I think about that day sometimes," Augustus admitted. "Walking into that asylum, seeing you for the first time. I knew immediately that you did not belong there, but I did not expect to fall in love with you, did not expect you to become my whole world." "The feeling is entirely mutual," Delilah said, turning in his arms to kiss him. "You saved me in every way that matters, Augustus Xavier, and I would choose you and this life over and over again in every lifetime." They made love there in the meadow, under the vast blue sky, with the aspens turning gold around them and the creek singing its endless song. It was unhurried and tender, a reaffirmation of vows spoken a decade ago, a promise of decades yet to come. When they returned to the cabin, they found that Thomas had kept his siblings in line. The cabin was still standing, and dinner was even started. Augustus ruffled his son's hair with pride while Delilah gathered her younger 2 into her arms. This was family, she thought. This was home. This was the life she had dreamed of during those long years in the asylum, when she thought she would never be free. And it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. The years continued their steady march. Thomas grew into a young man, tall and broad like his father, with the same quiet competence and love of the mountains. At 18, he began courting a girl from Twin Pines, a sweet-natured young woman named Emma who fit into their family like she had always been there. They married when Thomas was 19 and built a cabin of their own in the valley, close enough for help but far enough for privacy. Rose grew into a beautiful and brilliant young woman who wanted more than mountain life could offer. At 16, she announced her intention to go to Denver to attend the new women's college there. Augustus was horrified, but Delilah understood. She had needed freedom too once, needed to find her own path. They let Rose go with their blessing and enough money to see her through her education. She wrote faithfully every week and visited during summers. Eventually, she became a teacher, returning to Wyoming to run the school in Laramie. She never married, declaring herself perfectly content with her students and her independence. Augustus worried but learned to accept it. James, their youngest, was a curious blend of both parents. He had Augustus's strength and Delilah's sharp mind, and he became fascinated with medicine after the traveling doctor stitched up a deep cut on his arm. At 17, he apprenticed himself to the doctor, traveling the territory and learning the healing arts. He eventually became a doctor himself, one of the first to practice in the growing town of Cheyenne. Augustus and Delilah aged gracefully, their bodies slowing but their love unwavering. Augustus's hair turned gray, then white, his beard following suit. The lines on his face deepened, carved by years of sun and wind and laughter. But his strength remained, his arms still powerful enough to swing an axe or lift his wife effortlessly. Delilah's blonde hair silvered, and her face bore the marks of a life well lived. But her eyes remained clear and sharp, and her smile could still make Augustus's heart skip a beat even after decades of marriage. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents. Thomas and Emma had 4 children who grew up running wild through the mountain valleys. Rose, though unmarried, adopted 2 orphan children and raised them with fierce love. James married a fellow doctor and had 3 children of their own. The cabin that had once felt too small now felt too large with just the 2 of them. But Augustus and Delilah remained, stubbornly independent, refusing to move to town or live with any of their children despite repeated offers. "This is our home," Delilah said firmly whenever the subject came up. "This is where we fell in love, where we raised our children, where we built our life. We will stay here as long as we are able." On their 40th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered in the valley for a celebration. 3 generations of Xaviers filled the meadow, a testament to the love that had started with a mountain man and a girl who lived in an asylum. Augustus stood with Delilah's hand in his, looking at the faces of their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and felt his throat tighten with emotion. They had built this, he and Delilah. From nothing, from broken pieces and shattered pasts, they had built something beautiful and lasting. That evening, after everyone had left or settled into tents scattered around the property, Augustus and Delilah walked to the creek, just as they had done countless times over the years. The water ran cold and clear, just as it always had, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. 40 years, Augustus said, pulling Delilah close against his side. 40 years, and I love you more now than I did the day I married you. 40 years since you saw sanity in my eyes and took me home, Delilah said, leaning into his warmth. Best decision you ever made. Best decision I ever made, he confirmed. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. When I walked into that asylum, I was just trying to keep a promise to a dying man. I never imagined I would find my soulmate locked behind iron bars. And I never imagined a man like you existed, Delilah said. A man strong enough to see past the asylum walls, gentle enough to help me heal, patient enough to wait for me to find myself again. You are the best man I have ever known, Augustus Xavier. They stood there in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms as they had stood so many times before. Around them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnesses to their love story. Above them, the stars shone brilliant and clear, the same stars that had watched over them that first night when Augustus had carried Delilah away from the asylum and toward freedom. The years had been kind to them, giving them love and family and a life beyond their wildest dreams. They had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical. They had buried loved ones and welcomed new life. They had struggled and triumphed, failed and succeeded, always together. Now, in their 70s, they had earned their peace. Their children were grown and successful, their grandchildren thriving, their great-grandchildren beginning their own adventures. The legacy they left was not one of wealth or fame, but of love freely given, of second chances seized, of healing and hope. As they walked back to the cabin hand in hand, Delilah looked at the place that had been her sanctuary and home for over 4 decades. The logs had weathered to a soft gray, and the porch sagged slightly in the middle, but it was beautiful to her. More beautiful than the mansion she had grown up in, more precious than any palace. Inside, Augustus banked the fire while Delilah prepared for bed. They moved around each other with the ease of long practice, anticipating needs without words. In their bedroom they lay together as they had for 40 years, Delilah's head on Augustus's chest, his arms around her. "I was thinking," Delilah said drowsily, "we should write our story down. So the grandchildren know, so they understand where they came from." "You should write it," Augustus said. "You are the one with the way with words." "We will write it together," Delilah decided. "Your parts and my parts all woven together like our lives have been." "All right," Augustus agreed. "We will start tomorrow." But tomorrow came with its own demands and distractions, and they never did write it down. But that was all right, because they lived it instead, every single day, in the way they looked at each other, in the gentle touches and knowing smiles, in the love that had only grown stronger with time. Their story was written in the cabin they had built, in the children they had raised, in the land they had tended. It was written in the memories of everyone who knew them, this mountain man and his wife who had survived the asylum. It was a story of rescue and healing, of second chances and hard-won happiness, of love that conquered even the darkest circumstances. And if, on quiet evenings when the family gathered, someone asked how Augustus and Delilah had met, Augustus would pull his wife close and say simply, "She was the girl who lived in the asylum. I saw sanity in her eyes and took her home. Best decision I ever made." And Delilah would smile and add, "He saved my life. Then he taught me how to live it again." And that, really, was all that needed to be said. The mountain wind would sigh through the pines, the creek would continue its endless song, and the stars would shine down on the valley, where a mountain man and the girl from the asylum had built a love story for the ages. Their great-grandchildren would grow up hearing this story, would tell it to their own children someday, a testament to the power of seeing someone truly, of offering help without expectation, of love given freely and returned in full measure. In the end, Augustus and Delilah lived into their 80s, healthy and active until the very end, blessed with sharp minds and bodies that served them well. They passed within months of each other, Augustus first, slipping away peacefully in his sleep, and Delilah following soon after, having no desire to spend more than a season without her beloved husband. They were buried on the hill overlooking their valley, beneath the aspens they had loved so much, with a view of the cabin where they had built their life together. Their headstone was simple: Augustus Xavier and Delilah Xavier, beloved parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. United in life, united in death. But their true legacy lived on in the descendants who carried their names and their stories, in the valley that still echoed with their laughter, in the love they had shown was possible even in the hardest circumstances. They had proven that broken things could be mended, that hope could survive even in the darkest places, and that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with one person seeing another truly and offering them a chance at freedom. And so their story ended, as all stories must, but also continued as the best stories do, in the hearts and lives of those they left behind. The girl from the asylum and the mountain man who saved her had lived there happily ever after, and in doing so, had given that gift to generations who came after them. The cabin still stands in that valley, maintained now by great-great-grandchildren who understand its significance. Visitors come sometimes, family mostly, to stand on the porch and look out at the view Augustus and Delilah loved, to feel the peace of this place where love conquered madness, where hope defeated despair, where two people found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them both. And if you stand very quietly in the evening when the wind sighs through the pines and the creek sings its endless song, you might almost hear them, Augustus and Delilah, laughing together on the porch, young and in love and free. Because true love never really ends. It just transforms, becoming memory and legend and inspiration for those who come after. A reminder that no matter how dark things seem, there is always hope for healing, always the possibility of love, always the chance for a new beginning.